Eddy Arnold is an American legend. He sold 85 million records. He is a member of the Country Music Hall of Fame, one of the first men to be put into the Hall of Fame. He was the Country Music Association's first Entertainer of the Year, and the accolades go on. If I spent all the time on the accolades, I'd have no time for the interview. Eddy, welcome to our show.
Thank you, Ralph. Glad to be here.
You used to do baggy pants rube comedy in the early days of your career, didn't you?
Yes, I did. In those days, I'd do almost anything to earn a quarter.
Was this where you would black out a tooth?
Yeah. I don't remember any stories that I told, but I don't know. You don't even know if I was funny or not.
Did you do this in addition to singing?
Yeah.
Where was this?
This was in St. Louis.
How old were you in those days?
17, 18.
You didn't do this very long, though, did you?
No. I wasn't interested in that, you know. I was interested in the key of C, and I was interested in the guitar and the singing and that kind of thing.
Pee Wee King brought you to the Grand Ole Opry, didn't he?
Yes,
He
and his father-in-law.
How did you get that job?
I wrote him a letter. I had an old beat-up car, and I drove from St. Louis down to Tennessee to visit my mother. And while I was there, I tuned in to WSM, and I heard Pee Wee King and his group. I noticed he did not have a male vocalist. So I went back to St. Louis. I was doing a little radio program up at that time on a station called KXOK. And, it wasn't making any money. And so I wrote him a letter, longhand. Told him I could sing, I played the guitar, and I could, get by a little bit with harmony if somebody taught it to me. And wrote him, and I told him I'd send him a transcription if he wanted. You didn't have tape then. And so I got a letter back from his father-in-law.
Mr. Franks.
Telling me to send the transcription, which I did. And I got a letter back. Just come on down here. That's how I came.
I once read where you also played lead guitar for Pee Wee King, and then later I read that you said, well, I don't really play much guitar.
Well, that's right. I don't now. No, I didn't play lead guitar, but I played rhythm guitar. And, of course, that's what I did.
Whose songs did you sing?
In those days, of course, I liked a lot of the Gene Autry songs. He had a lot of pretty things that had been written by Fred Rose, and I would sing those songs because I liked those songs. They were pretty ballads, And Fred was such a good writer.
You also once told me that Bing Crosby was a great favorite of yours.
Oh, goodness, yes. I have many of his records today. Oh, Bing was fantastic.
Well, I'll carry this a step further. You said that country music doesn't realize the debt it owes to Bing Crosby.
That's right. That's right, because Bing was probably the biggest, most popular singer this country's ever had. He was the biggest record seller this country's ever had. He sold on one single record, White Christmas, 140 million. On one single, not an album now, I'm talking about one single record.
That's rather astounding, isn't it?
Yeah, I read this not long ago.
What did he do for country music?
He recorded so many of the country songs, like You Are My Sunshine, Makes No Difference Now, Walking the Floor Over You. He recorded the first hit I ever had. On and on and on. And he did them straight. He never made fun of them. He always did them in a melodic way. And of course, the songs became well known because of his popularity. The songs took on the popularity of the whole country. You know who was Winston Churchill's favorite singer and song during World War II?
I have no idea.
It was Bing Crosby's record of "You Are My Sunshine."
I didn't know that.
Yes, sir.
An uplifter.
Yes.
At a very grim time.
Yeah, that's right.
Eddie, you resent the term hillbilly, don't you?
Slightly, yes. I think it's degrading.
Have you ever been called a hillbilly?
Yes.
What is a hillbilly, in your estimation?
Well, I would have to say it must be somebody that lives in the mountains, and he lives in that part of the country and lives that kind of life, I would assume. I never have figured that out. I just thought, I was so glad when they finally came along and started calling it country. I was so glad because, that always bothered me.
Judge Hay, who founded the Opry, once said, "I don't like the term hillbilly because people use it in a derisive manner."
That's right.
In other words, they're not paying you a compliment when they call you a hillbilly.
Yeah.
And I know that you pioneered an awful lot of what has turned out to be a very successful industry. Some have credited you with being the first crossover artist, meaning to be accepted by the general population.
Yes.
And I think somebody once said you were credited with the urbanization of country music. Did you ever hear that?
Yes, I have. I don't know if I did or not, but that's what I wanted to do. I always wanted the business, the music, and the songs to have its proper recognition. I always thought they were good songs. And, I remember years ago, the radio stations would play the records only early in the morning, around 6 o'clock, and give the farm report. And in other words, they wouldn't play the records in what they call their prime time.
Yes.
That always bothered me. Of course, wasn't anything I could do about it, but it bothered me. I thought that the music deserved better treatment.
Archie Blyer once told me, Archie Blyer used to be Arthur Godfrey's conductor. Excuse me, and he was also the founder of Cadence Records.
That's right.
Discovered the Everly Brothers,
Yeah.
so forth.
Andy Williams.
Right. But he once said of you, he said, "I always thought of Eddy Arnold as just a singer of songs. Not necessarily country, not necessarily pop. Just Eddy Arnold, a singer of songs." And a very good one.
Well, I appreciate that. I always liked that man. Now I know why.
My guest is Eddy Arnold, and Eddy, I want to ask you about your health. I know that in March of 1990 you had bypass surgery.
Yes. I'm doing fine. I'm doing very well. A lot of people, I have to tell this, a lot of people think I had a heart attack, which I did not. I just went to my internist for a physical, and he didn't like the looks of a couple of things, and he said, "You need some attention." He called a cardiologist, and who turned out to be a good bird dog, and they put me in a hospital and took care of me. But I'm doing very well.
How many bypasses did you have?
I had two bypasses. But I must say, I have more energy now than I had before.
Have you been a good patient?
I have been a good patient. I'm still being a good patient. I walk every day. I walk 2 miles this morning. And I walk every day. Some days, if there's some business thing or something that I can't walk. Why? But it bugs me not to be able to walk. It makes me feel so good to walk.
I assume you altered your diet as well.
Yes, I watched that. I eat a lot of fruit. I eat a lot of vegetables. I've cut out my grease and the fried foods. And so I'm doing fine.
Well, you look great.
Thank you.
Eddie, I want to go back to the days when you sang at the Grand Ole Opry. I know you worked with Pee Wee King for a while, and then there was a day when you wanted to be a solo star. Tell me about that.
Well, obviously I was, you know, that was my dream. It was to finally sometime do a solo. I'll never forget, there was a man managing WSM at that time, no longer alive, by the name of Harry Stone. And I got to thinking. I had my wife, I had my mother, and I got to thinking, well, I ought to go talk to him because I knew he liked what I was doing. He had told me so. And I thought, well, if I don't tell him the truth, he might not hire me. So I told him, walked in his office and asked him if I could chat with him for a little bit. And he said, yeah, sit down. I said, well, I am going to quit what I'm doing. I'm working for Pee Wee and I love it, great man, but I said, I'm not getting anywhere. And I said, I'd like to go to work with you, for you. He says, I don't see any reason why. You can't work for me. Says you got a job.
So heretofore you've been working for Pee Wee.
That's right. And that's how it started.
All right. While you were at the Opry, somehow you acquired an RCA record contract. How did that happen?
Harry helped me do that.
Did he?
Yes. Harry, I'd been going along. I'd already auditioned for all the record companies. And nobody needed me because there were not many record companies. And Harry went to Chicago to an NAB meeting. There's an old music publisher there who's no longer alive, who was a great friend of the man that ran Victor Records. You notice I said Victor. Mm-hmm. This is before it was RCA Victor. And he was a friend of Harry Stone's. He's a great old music publisher of great old songs. He published Down by the Old Mill Stream, Oh Johnny O, published Cattle Call. And so Harry said to this old gentleman, his name was Forrester, Mr. Fred Forrester, Forster. Harry said to him, says, there's a young boy down there in Tennessee that ought to have a record contract. Mr. Forster said, well, when you think he's ready, I'll make a pitch for him to Frank Walker, that runs Victor Records. That was the only one I had not auditioned for, because I never thought they'd have me.
Mm-hmm.
Harry says he's ready now. That was in the days when two businessmen trusted one another, and a handshake meant a handshake.
So had you been turned down by Decca and Columbia?
All of them. Yes, all of them. They didn't need me. They had too many artists.
Then something tragic happened. You had an RCA record contract, but you couldn't record, could you?
That's right. There was a musician's strike, a musician's union strike. And it went on for a little over a year. I thought my career would never come around. I just thought it would never. But I didn't finish. I want to tell you about the rest of this. It was an interesting thing. Mr. Forrester called the man that ran Victor Records in New York. They were good, close friends, I learned later, and told him about me. And I got a wire from Mr. Walker. asking me if I'd be interested in making a record. Well, at that point in my life, I would have crawled on my belly all the way to Louisville to get a record contract. But anyhow, and then Mr. Forster called me on the phone and said, son, he treated me like a son, you know. He said, you're going to get a contract. He says, when you get it, you send it up here to me and let my lawyer look at it. Said, we might want to recommend some changes. And I did that. And he changed it a little bit. And of course I had the contract then, but I couldn't make a record.
When did you finally get to make a record?
December of 1944. The record came out in January of 45. So 85,000 copies, and that's all they pressed.
They sold every one. Why did they press so few?
They didn't have shellac.
Okay.
See, we were coming out of World War II, and there was a shortage of shellac, and of course the well-known artists on the label
Who were?
got preference.
Who were the well-known artists on
Well,
the
you had people like Vaughn Monroe, Perry Como, you had the Sons of the Pioneers, you had Elton Britt, who had just had a big hit on There's a Star Spangled Banner Waving Somewhere.
I think that was country music's first million-selling record.
Well,
Or excuse me, first record to receive a gold record.
yeah, probably so. It was big, I know. And of course those people got preference when it came to the pressings. I made 4 or 5 records, and, you know, just they didn't give me much they didn't allot me much shellac.
What was the name of the first record?
It was a thing called Mommy Please Stay Home With Me.
I used to hear you sing that on the Grand Ole Opry.
Yeah, oh yeah. And
What was the breakthrough record?
the breakthrough record was in 1946, a song called That's How Much I Love You. Now if I had a nickel, I know what I would do. You know, I spent it all for candy and give it all to you.
That was the first hit.
Yeah.
How big was that?
It did 750,000.
A lot of records in those days.
Yes.
Didn't you tell me once that Bing Crosby also cut that same
Yeah,
song?
sure did. Sure
Did
did.
he cover your record?
Yes, Bing did. Sinatra did too.
Oh, he did?
Yeah.
I didn't know that.
Yeah.
Eddie, after you had the hit That's How Much I Love You, then came a succession of hit records.
Yes. Oh goodness, yeah. I should get out on my knees. I had golly, I had so many of them, it's hard to remember all of them.
Bouquet of Roses, the biggest.
I would say Make the World Go Away is the biggest, which came much later. But in the days you're talking about, That's How Much I Love You. Then I did a big record on a thing called It's a Sin.
Yes.
And nobody don't remember it now. It's not one of the ones they remember. And of course, I'll Hold You in My Heart, and Don't Rob Another Man's Castle, Bouquet of Roses, Anytime, all kinds.
Why did you choose Cattle Call as your theme song?
I don't know. I always liked the song, and as I mentioned earlier in our conversation about Mr. Forster in Chicago, his company published that song, and I'd always heard it, but you know, I liked it. And then Fred Rose came along and rewrote it.
Was that an old Western folk song?
No, it was a valid copyright written by, the original version was written by a man by the name of Tex Owens. And then Fred came along and rewrote it and took no credit for it. He was a good friend of Mr. Forster. And he put a little middle part in there, you know. It used to be da 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 da, and then just repeat that over and over. But Fred changed it a little bit and put a little what we call a release in the middle.
But the catchy part was the top of the song.
Yeah, but he didn't change that at all.
Or you just came on yodeling.
Oh yeah, the cattle call. Yeah. Oh yeah, I did that, and then I used to do a program, you know, I used to do a radio program every day on the Mutual Network, 15 minutes a day, and I used it as a signature song.
Where did you record in those days? Because at this point, Nashville was not a recording center.
I went to Chicago first. Well, I did a couple of sessions here in a studio, a radio, WSM studio. And then I started going to Chicago. Then I started going to New York. I recorded, I don't know how many hits in New York. I recorded Bouquet of Roses in New York. And I'd take 3 or 4 musicians with me and then augment that with a bass player in New York and so forth.
So you would take some Nashville pickers with
Yes,
you.
I did.
Little Roy Wiggins.
Roy Wiggins and Hank Garland and yeah, I used to take a couple of the Willis boys. I used, a lot of times I'd take Vic Willis, play the piano.
Because they were part of your Mutual radio show, too.
Yes, they were. Uh-huh.
Eddie, a story you told me during the break I think is interesting. Frank Walker, who headed RCA when you joined them, later moved to MGM where he discovered Hank Williams.
Yes.
But you told me you never met him.
I never met Frank Walker until much later.
But you didn't meet him while you were the hot new star at RCA.
I met him after I had had a hit. After I had made That's How Much I Love You. Then I was in New York. And matter of fact, I met Mr. Forrester. We met up there is what I'm saying. And he took me over to Mr. Walker's office, who was already working, putting the MGM records together. And of course, he treated me very nice. And he asked me if I was going to re-sign my contract, you know, with Victor. He said, if you're not, I'd love to have you over here. Of course, I was already having good luck where I was, and I thanked him, told him I better stay where I was.
When did Victor become RCA Victor?
Somewhere around 48 in there. It's about the time that the 45 record became the thing, you know. They were putting out the 45 record, you know, and they were eliminating the old 78 record.
Eddie, you in the mid-40s were becoming a major star. And then I think in 1948, and all the time you were singing at the Grand Ole Opry.
Yes.
Then about 1948, you decided to leave the Opry.
Yes.
Why was that?
Well, I thought I'd done about as much as I could do there. And I had 2 radio programs outside of the Opry. I had the daily program on the Mutual Network every day, 15 minutes. I had a Saturday night show for the Ralston Purina Company, which was on a regional network. And then I started doing a Saturday night show on CBS. This is radio I'm talking about now. My strength was working for the Ralston Purina people. Mm-hmm. And not only this, at that time, the Opry had one thing that I never liked. They wanted 15% of your bookings to announce them on the radio station. So at that time, Colonel Tom Parker was my manager. We stopped announcing our appearances on radio because of the 15%. That was one of the reasons.
Was that the major reason you finally quit? And
Well, it's about as good as I can think of.
okay, all right. You left the Opry, and at this time you can sort of call your own shots because you were a major star.
Yes.
You had all these hits. At one time, I believe I read that you had as many as 6 songs in the top 10.
Yes, that's right. That's right.
You recall what they were?
Pretty much, Bouquet of Roses, Anytime, I'll Hold You in My Heart, probably a song called A Heart Full of Love. I'm sure It's a Sin.
There wasn't much room left for anybody else. Didn't they, in those days, didn't they just have a top 10?
Yes, I believe it was. It's either top 10 or top 15. I have all those old charts.
Do you have all your records?
Yes, yes, I do.
Every one back to Please Mommy, Please Stay
Yes,
Home With Me?
Yes, sir, the old 78s. I'm going to hold on to them.
Are you an orderly person? Do you have them in some orderly file?
Yeah, I have them in, like shelves like that.
I see.
Yeah.
Are they in your basement, or are they in your library?
Well, it is a kind of a basement room. It's a room I use to rehearse in, and I have, equipment to play music.
Eddy Arnold has had 147 records in the charts. I don't know whether he even remembers that.
I didn't.
But we looked that up.
I didn't.
That's an astounding number of records. You often hear us talk about the charts. The charts are the barometer the entertainers use to see how well they're doing. And if you're in the charts, you're succeeding. Eddy, as you know, in show business, there are a lot of rumors. And I once heard that when you decided to leave the Grand Ole Opry, that someone at WSM said, "Eddy, how can you do this? The Grand Ole Opry made you." Is that true?
That's true.
What was your response to that?
My response was that, well, if it made me, why hadn't it made the fruit jar drinkers? And let me explain to the people watching in, if they may not know who I'm talking about. It was an act was on there.
One of the old-time fiddle groups.
That's right. So that was my feeling. It was feeling then. It's still my feeling.
What did make you?
Records.
And songs.
Records and songs. I did what I would call love songs and, I guess, style. I would have to say that. I don't.
You were unlike anybody else of that era, too.
Yes. I wasn't supposed to make it, I was supposed to be too smooth to make it.
Who told you that?
Several people. Several people.
That you were too good a singer? Have you ever heard that?
Yes.
He's too good to make it?
Oh, yeah. Too smooth. He's too smooth. He can't do it.
Eddy, let's talk about Colonel Tom Parker. Tom Parker became legendary with Elvis, of course, and I think he managed Hank Snow at one time. But prior to that, he was your manager, wasn't he?
Yes, he was my manager from 1945 until 1953.
Was he always Colonel Tom Parker?
No. No, bless his heart. I still see him quite a bit. No, that's an honorarium. He got that title, I think, down in Louisiana.
How did you meet Tom Parker?
He came. There was an article about me in a magazine. I was just beginning, 1945, and there was an article about me in a little fan magazine called Radio Mirror. Nobody will remember Radio Mirror, but it's one of the magazines then. And he read the article. He knew I was a new artist. Came up here and introduced himself to me. There were a group of us went out, and he booked. We went out under a tent. There was Minnie, Uncle Dave, Jam Up and Honey, Blackface Team, and me. And Tom was the front man for that tent show for a year. That was 1944. And then in 45, my records. I'm sorry, that was 1943. And once I started making records. Well, I'll get it straight in a minute. That was 1944. Forgive me, I'm sorry. That was 1944. And then in 45, he and I got a business arrangement, and we became working partners.
You'd never had a manager up to this point, had
No,
you?
no. But
Was that a tough decision for you to
yeah.
take him on?
Yeah, but he was good for me. Tom's he's a hustler.
Did he do any crazy promotions to raise your visibility?
Well, it's just kind of Tom's style to be flamboyant. You know, I'm not flamboyant, but Tom was just. I don't remember anything really outrageous though that he did.
Was there one at the Fox Theater in Atlanta?
Well, I don't.
All right, I had heard once that you were playing there, and he hired all these young ladies to stand by the stage door as you came out to scream, and he also arranged to have that photographed by the local press.
Oh, he might have. I didn't know about that, but he wouldn't have to hire anybody at that point in my career.
Well, I'm thinking about early in your career.
Oh.
Before the records really began to hit.
Yeah.
Were you considered a teenage idol?
Well, a lot of them stood around, yelled.
They screamed?
Yeah.
As they did for Sinatra?
Well, not as much as they did for him.
They pulled your clothes?
Yeah. Oh, gosh, yeah. Yeah.
Did you ever feel like you were at some peril
Oh, yes.
to go out into the audience?
Yes. Yeah, many times. Many times. Many times.
Because you could certainly, you were selling as many records as anybody in the United States in those days.
I was, and I didn't realize it.
Really?
No, I did not. At that time, I'm talking about, if you go back to the 47, 48, 49, and that, I didn't know, I thought all of them at Victor was selling more records than me, you know. And it turned out, in later years, I learned that I was selling more than any of them. And I'll never forget, I was in New York one time, and the man that ran the record company at that time was a man by the name of Jim Murray, and I'd never met him. To me, you know, he was a god up there. Steve Scholes came to me and said, Mr. Murray wants to meet you. I said, oh my gosh, what does he want to meet? I was up there to make some records, you know, to record. I said, what does he want to see me about? He said, oh, he just wants to meet you. And he took me around to Mr. Murray's office, and Mr. Murray says, I just want to take a look at you. I said, I see these sales figures come across my desk every Monday morning, and I'm quite impressed. He said, I just want to see what you look like. And I thought he wanted to bring me in there and get rid of me, you know. But of course, I was selling a tremendous amount of
So
records.
you were outselling Perry Como, Vaughn
goodness,
Monroe,
yes,
and
I
all
was
those
selling,
other people.
You could put two of them together, and they were not. And I don't mean this in a braggadocious way. I'm just telling you the truth about it.
You were well on your way to your 85 million sales.
Yeah.
Being a country singer back in the 40s and 50s, even a country star, was not always the best position to be in, because some segments of the populace thought you were a redneck, thought you were ignorant, that you were a hillbilly. Eddie, I wanted you to recall for me, if you could, a story that demonstrates this point, about a show you did in Philadelphia. And you went to a hotel to check in, and you experienced some discrimination. Do you recall the story?
Yes, I do. I do. I called before I went there. I called long distance, this particular hotel. The mistake I made is not getting the man's name that I spoke to and asked for a reservation. But when I arrived there, I recognized his voice. He was back behind the desk. He never heard of my conversation when I called to get a reservation. And of course, I didn't realize what his motive was, you know. But anyhow, I didn't stay in the hotel.
Why were you there? Why were you in Philadelphia?
I was doing a program. I was appearing there doing something. I have to level with you. I've kind of forgotten.
Were you on some sort of all-star show?
Might have been. No, I didn't do any of those shows. Seems like I was going to appear in a park, which is about 15, 20 miles out of Philadelphia. And there's, you know, I wanted to stay in Philadelphia rather than to stay up there because there wasn't any good places to stay up there.
So you went to the counter and you said, "I'm Eddy Arnold
Yes.
from Nashville. I'd like my room." And what did they say?
He said, we have no room for you.
Now, why do you feel like he didn't like you?
I don't know. I didn't know then, and I don't know today. I just, it bothered me. I felt.
You feel like he wouldn't give you the room because you were the hillbilly singer?
I think so. I think so. That's what I felt at the time.
Did he tell you to go down the street or just
Yeah.
leave?
Yeah, and I told him. I said, "You're the man I talked to on the phone. I recognize your voice, sir." He said, "No."
He wouldn't own
No,
up to it.
no, he would.
Eddy, you had at one time what many feel was one of the greatest managers to ever manage an act, Colonel Tom Parker. But ultimately, the two of you split.
That's right.
Why did you leave Colonel Tom Parker?
Tom and I had two different personalities. Let me quickly tell you, and then I'll explain. Tom and I are good friends today. He comes to town, we get together. We go eat catfish and have a great time together. Now, I'll tell you, Tom's a dear man, a good manager, but a completely different personality from me. I'm very laid back, very quiet, not flamboyant at all. Tom is. It's just two different personalities that clash. And that's what we were doing. We were clashing. So, in 1953, I decided it was time to make the move and not be associated with Tom.
How did he feel about that?
How did he feel? Well, of course, he was distraught about it. I made a cash settlement with him, and we both went on our ways. And he managed a couple other people for a couple of years, and then I think about 3 years later, he got Elvis, and of course had a fantastic career with him.
Eddy, because of your celebrity, because of all these records we've talked about that you sold, you began to appear on network television, didn't you?
Yes.
Which was the first show?
First big show was the Milton Berle Show. That was in 1949. Of course, at that time, that was the hottest program on television. Television, you know, was just getting going, but Berle was the biggest name in television at that time. And I did Berle's show, I did the Godfrey show. Oh golly, I did a lot of them.
Didn't you host the Tonight Show?
Yes, but that was in later years. That was in the 60s. I was talking to you about the earlier television, and oh yeah, I hosted the Tonight Show, and of course I hosted the Kraft Music Hall for a few years, beginning in 67, 68, 69, 70, 71.
When you went to the Tonight Show, you were on with Johnny Carson, I
Yeah.
suppose, first,
Yeah.
and then later you hosted for him.
That's right.
Tell me about Ginger Rogers.
Oh, well, the night I hosted his show, she was a guest. She came on. Of course, I've admired Ginger all these years, and she, you know, she still looks great. And So I don't know how the conversation got around to it, but somebody said something about doing a dance, and so Ginger and I did the Charleston.
That's in your book.
Is it?
This book was published in 1969, The Man from Chester County.
Yeah.
And that's where I got that story.
Well, it happened. Yeah, Ginger and I did the Charleston.
That you were reluctant at first to ask her to dance,
Yeah.
to do the dance.
Yeah.
And then finally you thought you'd take a chance that she would want to do it. And she did.
Yeah.
And turned out very well.
Yeah, yeah. The audience loved it.
Is this book still available?
No, no.
You think there'll ever be a sequel to this?
I don't know. Maybe sometime. You know, I never wanted to write that book. I really didn't write it. I sat and told the guy my story, you know. And
Are you a private person?
yes,
Was that the reason you didn't want to reveal yourself in a book?
that's right. That's right. I thought it was too soon for me. I didn't think at that time that I had lived long enough for a book to have any value. You know, I always think of people that write books about themselves. They've lived a long time and had a lot to happen to them, and nothing sensational had ever happened to me at that point, and hasn't yet. And you know,
How can you say that?
well, I always think of people, you know, you're always interested in people that beats up their wife and gets drunk and runs over the cat and all those things, and that's what the people want to read about. Well, I haven't done all those things. I live a very quiet life, and always have and always will. That's just me. I always think that I'm not interesting. That's the thing about it.
Well, you've always misjudged yourself. You didn't know you were the hottest selling act at RCA when you in fact were.
Well, yeah.
You've underestimated Eddie Arnold.
Well, maybe so, but that's the way I feel about it.
Eddie, another thing that people say about you is that you're rich, that you own Brentwood, that you own most of the land around Brentwood, Tennessee, which is just to the south of the city. And yeah, I know you've lived there a long time. And you have always been a very frugal man, haven't you?
Yes, I am.
And according to this old book, you mentioned that you grew up in poverty, and that was the reason. That's the reason why.
That is. That is. You see, on the back of that book, got my father and my mother. See, I'm born of parents that were not young parents when I was born. My father was 58. My mother was 44. I'm sure I was a great surprise to them. And
you were about to point out something.
and you can see here in the back, you see one of my brothers, my older brother, standing there against the old garden fence. Right over my mother's shoulder there is the old tool shop. And that was our farm. My father passed on, and we lost it all. My father was deeply in debt.
So this had a great impact on your business acumen.
Oh, yes.
You know, you told me something on a sad day. We were standing there in the rain, it was cold, and we were about to bury Marty Robbins, and we were both pallbearers. Mm-hmm. And you told me that in 1948, you had already purchased your cemetery lots.
Yes,
that
I
far
had.
back. Which I thought was kind of strange because you were very young in those days.
Yeah.
Was that part of your business philosophy?
Yes. I thought it was a good investment because, and it is, as it turned out, was I purchased 12 of them. And I can't tell you how many times they've increased in value since that time. If I didn't need them at all, which I'll need something, said sometime, but if I didn't, I could sell them at quite a profit.
You've done very well in real estate, haven't you?
Yes, yes. I've bought quite a bit of real estate. And I've turned a good bit of it. I I never, see, when I started becoming successful, I had a horror of winding up broke. I really did. And I do today. And as that old saying is, you only pass this way once. And I just couldn't then, can't now, see myself being successful, earning money, and not winding up with it. Now, I looked around at some of my contemporaries several times, and I saw that they were throwing their money away. I'd always talk to myself. I'd say, you're not going to do that. You're going to put it away. And I did. I started saving it. Quick as I could pay off my home, I paid off my home. And then I started putting money in the bank. And then I started buying land. I'm not bragging here.
I understand.
I'm just telling you.
I understand, because we both know entertainers who have gone through fortunes.
Yes.
Unfortunately, people had to do benefits for them.
Sure. Yeah.
Things like that.
And that shouldn't happen. It really shouldn't happen, you know. And if I've never wanted to impress anybody. A lot of them want to impress somebody, you know. They got to have 4 cars in the driveway and all that business. So, not me.
Eddie, I want to talk about Eddy Arnold today for a moment. Are you still performing?
Yes. I just don't perform as much. I still perform, and I do a couple of dates a month.
You work in Vegas?
Not now. I haven't for it's been about 3 years since I've done anything out there.
You go out and sing with symphony orchestras?
Sometimes. And I perform in some of the theaters, you know, particularly in the East, and the theaters in the Round and that kind of thing. And I'm not going to date this program by telling you where I'm going next week.
Well, I was going to ask you, though, how many days do you do a year?
Probably 25, 30 days. I decided several years ago, that's not something I just decided here lately. I cut back a good many years ago, but now I've cut back even more. I wanted to give my family, I wanted to be with them. And I had a wife. I thought she deserved some of my time. Haven't performed a lot.
How about records?
Yes.
Still recording?
Yeah, I just made an album. First one in over 6 years.
Tell me a little bit about it.
They're just pretty love songs. Called You Don't Miss a Thing is the name of the album. And,
Are they all new songs?
well, a couple of them have been done by other people, but the others are new songs. I did almost all new songs.
So this is something coming out this year.
Yeah. No, it's out now.
It's out now.
It's out now. I don't know if it's going to be successful or not, but if it is, I might do another one.
I'm going to ask you to tell me one more story. Another grass mowing story about a friend of yours.
Well, there's a dear friend. This about another man that had on old clothes. He was cutting his grass. He's not alive anymore. He was a dear friend of mine. He was a securities dealer. But he was running his lawnmower in his front yard. It was a warm day. A lady drove by in the car, and she had a very pronounced Southern accent. And she said, "Oh, hello there." Said, "What do you charge for cutting grass?" My friend looked at her in the car and said, "Oh, this woman in here lets me sleep with her." It was his wife, of course.
Eddy, thank you. Thank you for sharing your life with us.
Thank you.
In this brief
Thank you.
moment.
I hope I've been interesting.
You have.